Before you can understand the rental apartment industry and rent control legislation, you need to understand the history of rent control. So here it is in about 3 or 4 minutes, okay? So prior to 1975, Ontario was a rental housing regime like most. There was no rent controls. You had to put your heat on in September. You couldn't, you had to maintain your building and so on, but rent regulation wasn't a factor. At the end of your lease, the landlord charged what the marketplace could bear. Just like a commercial lease when you rent an office. At the end of your lease, your landlord can do what he wants with his rent. And so why doesn't a landlord double his office rent? Because the market won't allow him to. And if a commercial landlord does a bad job, then his tenant is going to move, or he's going to demand repairs, and the landlord will probably do it. That's the way the business works. So let's go back to 1975. We have a conservative government in Ontario, run by Bill Davis, and a conservative government brings in rent controls, which is very strange. You had a minority government at the time with the NDP holding the balance of power. The Liberals brought in rent control, brought in wage and price controls federally. So we had this temporary piece of legislation brought in, and it was supposed to expire in 2 years. It had a sunset clause, just like income tax after World War I. They said, we'll bring in income tax, we'll pay for the war, and then we'll get rid of income tax. Never happened. So now we've gone through a generation of rent control legislation where there have been 6 or 7 iterations of this rent control legislation here in Ontario. So when they brought in rent control legislation in 1975, developers said, and maybe what they're going to say today, well, why would we build if you bring in rent controls? So the Conservative government at the time, in their wisdom, said, okay, we're going to rent control all the buildings built before 1975, but any building built after 1975 would be exempt from rent controls forever. Some developers didn't believe them and stopped building. Some developers continued to build. That's what happened initially. Then in 1985, the Liberal government, David Peterson's government, said forever was over and retroactively brought all those buildings under rent controls. So you were a developer in 1975, you built, you were told by the government there'd be no rent controls, and 10 years later, they put your buildings under rent controls. Big problem. At that point, so most construction stopped in 1975. Some few developers continued on and built through to 1985, and then rental housing development almost stopped. Okay? Interestingly enough, in 1991, the NDP government, that was not particularly friendly towards the development industry and landlords, brought in a temporary rent control abatement on new buildings. So they said any building built after 1991 would be exempt from rent controls for 5 years. But they'd also tightened up the rent control legislation at the same time. So while they were saying go ahead landlords and build, they brought in more draconian legislation on older buildings. All stuff in the past, but that's the story. Then in 1998, the Conservative government of Mike Harris said, yeah, we're going to sort of codify that exemption of no rent controls on buildings built after 1991, but they made it sort of to perpetuity. So you were told in 1998, go ahead and build and we'll exempt your buildings from rent controls forever. So in 1991, the NDP said it. In 1998, the Conservatives said it. The Liberals agreed in early 2000 again that they should be exempt. And now, all of a sudden, for the second time in history in Ontario, we've said forever is over. So all those developers who built after 1991, those buildings are now under rent control. It's not the end of the world, but you know what? It's not good. And so this is the second time it's happened. Developers rightfully should be cautious about developing. Fortunately, the marketplace is strong, the demand is strong, you get to set your rents at the market. It's just that now you can't raise them after people have moved in.